Good afternoon, and welcome to this, I think, 45th anniversary presentation of the Lillian Smith Book Awards. I'm Charles Johnson. I am president of the Southern Regional Council, and I am here to bear witness to the fact that there is a progressive Southern tradition. And it was exemplified in the middle of the last century by Lillian Smith, who was among the first to advocate for a society based on true social equality in the South at a time when to do so was not fashionable. And since 1968, the Southern Regional Council has presented awards in her honor, honoring books by authors whose works not only exhibit a high literary quality, but also an honest portrayal of the South, its people, its problems, and its promise. And for the last several years, these awards have been presented by the Southern Regional Council in collaboration with the University of Georgia Libraries, which house the Lillian Smith manuscripts and papers, and with the Georgia Center for the Book, which sponsors the Decatur Book Festival. We're honored to present this collaboration again this year. And before we do anything else, I want to give special honor to some folks who really make this project work. One is Margaret Hale, who is in the back, who is the infrastructure of this program. But also our panel of jurors who have waded through for you 38 excellent nominated books to present the awards that you will see presented today. They include Vicki Crawford from Atlanta, Merrill Penson from Athens, Constance Curry from Athens, James Taylor from Decatur, and Dr. Mary Twining Baird from Atlanta as well. We want to thank them for all they have done. We want to thank you as well for coming and hope you enjoy the ceremony.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. I'm Toby Graham, director of the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the University of Georgia, which, as Charles pointed out, is the home of the Lillian Smith papers. And it is my distinct honor today to introduce to you Francoise in Hamlin, winner of a 2013 Lillian Smith Book Award. Dr. Hamlin is the Hans Rothfels Assistant Professor of History and Africana Studies at Brown University. She earned her PhD at Yale, master's degree from the University of London, bachelor's degree from Essex University. She is the recipient of a C. Vann Woodward Dissertation Prize and 2 other notable prizes for her graduate research, and is the 2012 recipient of the Berkshire Conference Best First Book Prize. Dr. Hamlin's book is titled Crossroads at Clarksdale, with the subtitle The Black Freedom Struggle in the Mississippi Delta After World War II. And she begins her introduction with a quote from civil rights leader Aaron Henry. He said in 1963, "Ours is one hell of a story, but freedom is worth every adversity." And Dr. Hamlin tells Henry's story, alongside that one, that of a very different kind of activist. Vera Mae Piggy's work as a beautician gave her both the economic independence and the opportunity to organize. 2 kinds of work were occurring, Dr. Hamlin writes: the work of creating beauty and the work of creating a movement. Dr. Hamlin weaves together themes of race, gender, and class that flow through a compelling and illuminating narrative. She concludes her book with a personal and very moving epilogue that brings Clarksdale's history up to the present. Crossroads at Clarksdale is excellent scholarship. It's important work, but it's also beautifully written and really a great read, and I recommend it to all of you. Dr. Hamlin, it is my pleasure to present to you the Lillian Smith Book Award.
Thank you so much. I asked him not to embarrass me, but he did anyway. I am very, very, very honored to be here, and particularly for this award, and I'll make clear what I mean about that. I'd like to thank the Southern Regional Council, the University of Georgia Libraries, the festival organizers, the DeKalb County Public Library for sponsoring this award, and then the jurors who made this moment happen for me. I've written everything down because I get a little nervous. As you probably figured out, I'm English, and I'm going to answer the question that I always get is, why was I in Mississippi? I was a high school exchange student in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Not the place I had chosen to be, the place I'd chosen to go, but the place the organizers thought I'd feel at home. And it was clear that I was the first and perhaps the last black exchange student to come out of England. And it was clear that the American-based exchange company didn't know what to do with me. So rather than place me in a home in a city close to the one, somewhere similar to the one I'd grown up in, which would be in London, I ended up in the Mississippi Delta and lived with an amazing black woman who had worked as a domestic her entire life. That experience changed my life. I had forfeited a guaranteed spot to read law at the University of London upon my return, and I studied US studies in an effort to understand what I had seen, what I had experienced, and what I felt. And that first degree led to a couple more, and this book is a culmination of that experience, and it narrates the black mass movement in Clarksdale, from the founding of the local NAACP branch following the rape of 2 young black women, to the turn of the century when President Bill Clinton toured Clarksdale as part of his New Markets initiative. That year as an exchange student taught me about race, how it was a social construct, and how I was an anomaly in the US racial system. I also realized that the history taught in the schools didn't reflect the history I knew to be true just by living there, and from the US history I had learned in the British classroom. Furthermore, my peers had no clue about the activities of the people in their own community. No sense of outrage existed in what I could see then as inequality in opportunities. Lee Academy, the school created soon after the public schools desegregated in 1970, was literally up the road, and we would pass it every day on the school bus. And I seemed to be the only one kind of horrified by the irony. We had to take Mississippi history, and I think it was a requirement for all seniors, and I remember my confusion at the insufficient treatment of slavery, particularly that the slave labor had cleared the Delta land on which the county occupied. Rather than focusing on the founding of Coahoma County, had pretty much stayed with the white families. And as the history moved into the 20th century, the Civil Rights Movement unit focused, albeit too briefly for my liking, on Dr. Martin Luther King. And the students, including myself until my own research later, had no clue that a vibrant movement happened in Clarksdale. And at that time, all the organizers were still alive. In fact, Dr. King came to Clarksdale only a handful of times during his activist career, and he never stayed overnight. None of it sat well with me, even then when I really didn't know very much. I always felt uncomfortable with the over-attention I received from the teachers and even the local press, but at the same time, I really fell in love with the place. Mississippi is a beautiful state with all its ugly scars and wounds that still fester, and I love it so much that I now take students there every spring break so that they can share and I can share with them what I learned about the US in Mississippi, and then guide them through their own self-discovery. Mississippi transformed me, and for that I'm forever grateful, even though every now and then I think about my life as a barrister in London, but that's a whole, that's a whole other conversation. This project on the civil rights movement kind of snuck up on me. The experience during my exchange year made me want to learn more about race in the US, but I thought I was done with Mississippi. It was only in graduate school that an oral history project brought me back to the Delta. It was only then that I start reading more about the movement in Clarksdale in Mississippi, and realized that actually very little existed about Clarksdale, and that the local story varied from the SNCC-centered narratives I had read. In the late 1990s, there was already a huge amount of movement scholarship, so as a graduate student, I was very hesitant to add more. But the story kept coming back, and the oral history project happened because I started talking to folks in Clarksdale, and from there I learned about Aaron Henry and his role, and then I was introduced to Mrs. Vera Piggy. So I'd like to believe that this story chose me to be its narrator. This book started as a dissertation, and I made one decision straight away. Even though I was writing it for a committee that demanded a certain academic sophistication in language, I wanted to make sure that the people I wrote about could understand it and accept it, and that they could see themselves in this book, and that they could claim it as theirs. Too often I've talked to movement participants and veterans, particularly African Americans, who have complained about how their stories were distorted or oversimplified, or that no one had ever talked to them about their own experiences while the book was being written. And that's if they ever got to read the book. So like I've said, we have this huge cache of civil rights movement scholarship, and more keeps coming, but these veterans only endorse a handful of them. And I wanted mine to be accessible. So I wanted my host mother, Miss Corinne Bradley, who lived and died in the Delta with an 8th grade education and a PhD in common sense, to be able to read it. She died in 2005 and never got to see the book. Validation came from movement activists. I got validation from the Academy and professional organizations, and it's helped me to do my work and be very successful, and I'm very grateful for that. But having movement activists confirm the stories, the tone, the general frameworks, I knew I was onto something. Mrs. Vera Piggy's daughter is a principal character in the Clarksdale story, and she's very reluctant to relive that past, yet she read the entire manuscript and called me when she was finished, told me to sit down, she's a lot like her mother, very bossy, and read to me her scripted response about how much the research meant to her. And we were both crying at the end of that. Charlie Cobb, a SNCC worker who is an author himself, read the book and has supported it. This general kind of support for your work takes a lot of time. This book took a while for many reasons, but first among them was the time it took to invest in people's lives so that they could tell you their truths and trust you with their stories. This prize means a lot to me too, because it reflects the accessibility of the book beyond academic circles, and that was my goal, so thank you so much for validating that. Oral history became the main way to understand Clarksdale. Archival documents might pinpoint dates, times, people, but voices and memory adds meat to these bones, and that's also the hardest part of the project, particularly for me as a bit of an introvert with a funny accent. These voices complicate movement history. They sometimes contradict long-held notions, like the notion that African Americans desired the integration of schools, when in reality they desired equal funding, equal resources, equal respect, and representation in decision-making school boards. With the local history, I cover many themes like Black leadership, particularly the juxtaposing the leadership of Aaron Henry, who was a World War II vet, a pharmacist, who spearheaded the formation of the local NAACP branch, went on to be president of the state conference, and moved on into public office. And then Vera Piggy, a beautician, a mother, secretary of the local branch, and the state youth council advisor. That juxtaposition reveals the variety of Black leadership and the subsequent strains and tensions. Through Mrs. Piggy, I also discuss women's work, activist mothering, not a feminist model of women's work, but a way in which some African-American women activists extended notions of mothering to their civil rights work and exercised great leverage from within their gendered social status. And then at the end, I consider notions of success. How is it that President Clinton stopped in Clarksdale, one of only 5 stops in a national tour of economically depressed areas? When that happened, I was in the middle of the project, and I was like, yes, I have an end. After a rich story of activism and organizing that I was writing, with these valleys of defeat and peaks of success. So how do we define success? And can we define success? As we are in the midst of 50-year anniversaries of many of the popularly perceived landmarks and these events in the movement, we've just crossed the 50-year threshold for the March on Washington. Next summer is 50 years since Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. My book feels very timely, and that's just a coincidence. It celebrates the timing, not the book. It celebrates but challenges and complicates, and there is definitely a lot more work to be done. This project has brought many full circle moments for me. The most important one is that I'm able to explain what I saw in the 1990s. I have some answers, I have a lot more questions, and I have something to give back to the community that gave me a home for a year. Today provides another full circle. The dissertation from which this book emerges is titled, "The Book Hasn't Closed, the Story Isn't Finished, Continuing Histories of the Civil Rights Movement." It was a title that I'd used almost from the beginning because it figured out, it said what I was trying to do. Not a history that had a triumphant end, but an ongoing story of human interaction and conflict, failures and successes. At the end of my dissertation research, as I read more secondary sources to incorporate and enlarge the range of voices and opinions in the South, I read a book and I wrote this I took a quote and quoted it in the original epilogue as an epigraph. "I have not ended this story, for there is no end." It was a perfect quote that supported the title I already had. Lillian Smith wrote those words in 1964 in her book, Our Faces, Our Words. The quote didn't make the rewrite and the editing for the book, neither did the dissertation title, and I'm happy about that. But her sentiment is definitely a part of it. Winning this award in her name brings me full circle, and with very much gratitude. So thank you again.
Good afternoon. I am Mary Twining Baird, the chair of the Lillian Smith Awards Committee, and I would love for the members of the committee to stand, please, so you may see the troops, because thank you. Everything we do in concert as a committee. And it is a pleasure every year to work with this group. Oh, and Toby, I didn't see if you stood up because I wasn't looking at you, sorry. Okay. South Carolina has a sterling record of human rights activity. Penn Center, where Martin Luther King and his lieutenants met and planned. The Progressive Club on Johns Island, where Ben Mack, Septima Clark, Esau Jenkins, Bill Saunders, and others met and taught, come to mind. Today, we celebrate the fine biography of one of South Carolina's sons, Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of the movement, by Dr. Randal Maurice Jelks. Randal M. Jelks, Associate Professor of American Studies and African American Studies at the University of Kansas, has explored an aspect of African American history in African Americans in the Furniture City, the struggle for civil rights in Grand Rapids. In his biography of Benjamin Elijah Mays, he treats the making of history at its core, the band of courageous, unrelenting heroes who made it happen through strength of character, influence, and insight into the significance of their and others' actions. Mays held to his beliefs as he waded through the morass of the hate and social discord of a segregated South and figured out the best way forward to a better time. Incorporating the roles of church, religion, and secular education, Mays undertook the massive task of changing the South and the country. Dr. Jelks places him where he belongs, as a pillar of strength, commitment, and resolute action, so that he may be properly understood and appreciated. The celebration of such a paragon is a work well within the mission of the Lillian Smith Book Awards, and we are delighted to award one of this year's prizes to Dr. Randal Maurice Jelks.
I would like to thank the committee. I thought it was a joke when I was like, really? I saw the illustrious names and I said, really, come on. So I would like to thank the Lillian Smith Award Committee for bestowing this prestigious award on Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of the Movement, a biography. And I would be remiss if I did not thank my press, the University of North Carolina Press, and my editor, who's now retired, David Perry, who recruited this book for believing in the project and promoting it. I'm deeply honored and gratified to receive this award in this city where Mays' bones rest on the campus of Morehouse College. Mays believed that faith and purposefulness and academic achievement and the practice of democracy in all endeavors were essential to living a wise and prosperous life. For 27 years, he eloquently expounded these ideas to young men who attended Morehouse College. And believe me, I have met some of them who are not so young anymore, but who tell me their Mays stories as I walk and travel around the country. The class of 1961, by the way, wanted me to let you know that they were the best class of Morehouse College ever. Students who sat at Mays' feet reads like a who's who of recent American history. I continue to marvel at his determination to escape the confines of his meager existence in Epworth, South Carolina. As the child of ex-slaves and tenant farmers, to rise to as an esteemed churchman worldwide and educator internationally. My fellow historian and Mays biographer, Jack Roper, entitled his book, The Magnificent Mays, and indeed, I believe that Benjamin Mays was that and more. I wish to thank my family. My brother and sisters and my 2 nephews are here, but my children and wife are not. But I want to thank my family who endured my research trips, long evenings of writing and rewriting, and constantly talking about a man my children never met, but who now know as a member of the family. And finally, I always want to make these remarks short. I want to thank someone who is now long gone, a mentor, a man by the name of Arthur Hughes. In 1969, I came to Atlanta as a part of a trip of the YMCA, something that Mays had participated in a great deal. Mr. Hughes worked for the Dry Street YMCA in New Orleans and organized 2 busloads of boys to come to Atlanta to the initial gravesite of Martin Luther King, Jr. Hughes never knew that he sparked in my imagination to write and explore the multi-stories of the South's civil rights in American history. So I want to thank Mr. Hughes, who is now long gone, and thank you for this award. Thank you very much.
We have time for just a few questions, if anybody has any questions. Yes.
For Dr. Francoise. Yes, I was sort of curious as to what your views are of what's happening in Clarksdale today and what its impact on you in terms of the economic, political, and criminal crisis that's going on.
The Clarksdale today looks very similar to the Clarksdale I was in, and that's sort of my regret. That is that it hasn't changed very much. I think the arguments have become more sophisticated, but it hasn't changed very much. Downtown's changed. It's very gentrified now, and there are cafes and stuff that were never there when I was there. But the general economic situation has actually got worse. So that's what I've seen. The reception of the book has been mixed, and depending on who you talk to and whose family was involved. But for the most part, and I tried to do some work last summer talking to high school students, because I was one, and when you need to learn your own history. And getting students sort of interested in history is quite difficult now because of the way school has changed, and schooling and testing and all of that. That's a whole other book. But there's a lot of work left to be done, just educating young people to care about their own history and then make a change. I think that's where the future is.
Are there other questions? Yes.
For Dr. Jelks. I believe that Dr. Benjamin Mays was delivered the eulogy at Martin Luther King's funeral. Number one, is that correct? Is that true?
That's correct. When Dr. King's body was processed from Ebenezer onto the campus of Morehouse College, and at the very centerpiece there's a wonderful picture that I got from the civil rights photographer Flip Shelke's estate of Mays standing before this crowd on the campus of Morehouse College. And recently, there's a Mays Museum that's opened up in Greenwood, South Carolina, not Greenwood, Mississippi, but Greenwood, South Carolina. And one of the curators gave me a bootleg copy of a tape of that, and it was delivered with, Mays himself was such an orator. And yes, he did do that.
And that was my second question, was how was the eulogy received, and why was he selected? Do you know how?
Oh, he was the night Dr. King's assassination. Mrs. King, Coretta Scott King, called Dr. Mays and said that it had been Martin's wish that you would perform his eulogy, in which Mays responded, sadly, I had always hoped he would perform mine, because Mays was older than, and he was approaching, he was in the 70s in that moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
This is also for Dr. Jelks. I think, if I'm correct, your first book was about African-American workers?
No, my first book is about African-Americans who lived in a city that once was the furniture capital of the United States, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I'm just curious how you switched from that topic, how you decided to then write about
Oh, that's a very interesting question. The second president of Morehouse College was a man by the name of Samuel Graves. He happened to be from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I said, well, you know, I mean, in the good Lord's providence, this is providential. I should write this book on maize now. No, I had done both. I was doing research of 2 books at once. So I would be at the Library of Congress, and then I would run over to Howard, and then I had to say this, and I see Karen here. When I was naive to this project, this wonderful woman who works at Clark Atlanta U in the Woodruff Library was at Howard University, and she says, well, here's some resources for you. And then she left me, like on a date, you know, like, and came to Atlanta. But no, it really was the kind of going back and forth and tying these narratives together, the narratives of these civil rights stories, multiple stories. I'm writing about a northern industrial town, a small black community, but having different kinds of struggles, but nevertheless struggles. And so linking those stories together is what I think about. I don't think about, I write about one section or another. I think it's the ways that these things cross, because people do cross. In the largest black population of Grand Rapids today, they all are formerly Mississippian and Tennesseans. So they are connected in many different ways.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Hamlin, you already know that I'm from Clarksdale, but I've been gone since the late 60s. When you were there as a senior in high school, and what, I don't even know what school.
Coahoma County High.
Coahoma County High. Is it, you know if it still exists?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Some of them are closed.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Hamlin,
Yes.
I too am from Mississippi and very familiar with Clarksdale. Clarksdale is very close to Tunica. Did you include Tunica in any of your works? Because Tunica was the poorest city in Mississippi.
I include it in the epilogue when I talk about the casinos. And how because a lot of the people working in the casinos are driving up from Clarksdale, because that's where the jobs are, because there's nothing in Clarksdale now. So that's the only place. Or when I talk about Coahoma Opportunities Incorporated, the anti-poverty agency in Clarksdale, its reach did hit Tunica for a while, and then it came, you know, once the funding started to dry up, they came more local. But I don't tell the Tunica story. And I talk about Clarksdale, but there's also a Coahoma County story, because the school districts were separate. They had the city of Clarksdale school districts, and I talk about that, but the Coahoma County desegregation story is just as juicy. And the editor was like, it's already too long. You have to make a choice. So I did. But you know, there are all these multiple local stories that have to be told, or at least be acknowledged that there are more than, you know, there's more than one. Yeah.
I wonder if you heard from the mayor of Clarksdale or Morgan Freeman.
No. I did interview Mayor Espy for the book, and I got a politician's interview. So I couldn't use any of it. But he's in the story because he was the first black member of the school board. But now he runs it, so it's, yeah. So, and Mr. Freeman, I tried to get a response, and I know someone who knows him very well, so I had an en route, and no, nothing.
Yes, ma'am.
Could I have a question for Dr. Hamlin as well?
Oh, hi.
I'm a history student about to write my thesis, and I'm writing about black women in Memphis, which isn't too far from Clarksdale. And I was wondering if you might have any suggestions for what the most fun place to look for sources is, or did you find any that were really wild and you didn't expect?
Wisconsin. They're in Wisconsin. What I found is that a lot of the SNCC archives and SNCC workers sent their papers to Wisconsin as far away from the South as possible. They have a huge collection that they've actually just digitized. So it's all online. Of course, it wasn't when I had to go. I had to go to Wisconsin. But that was like, are you kidding me? Like, they have Black Panther posters, originals, in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. That was like, wow, this is really a national story.
Dr. Hamlin, would you consider writing a 20 years after, or a story that would bring us into the original question we had, was what's going on now?
Would I consider it? Ask me in 20 years. I have like 3 or 4 things I want to do before that.
Okay. When we're on our 60th reunion, Charles, we'll...
Mary, that's a segue into a question I would ask. What's next on the horizon? What should we be looking for from both of you? Because both of these books are absolutely wonderful, and I highly recommend that anybody who's sitting in this room, please lay your hands on them.
Well, can you come just walk around with me and, and just tell people that? Well, my next project that I've been trying to write grants about is a little different. I want to do a little more contemporary project because I'm interested in the intersection of religion and social movements. And so my next project, at least in theory, is I want to be, I'm free to be what I want, Muhammad Ali, faith, politics, and creative struggle. And the story is not about Ali. He's at the center, to you all know, book presses and press people. You got to have a narrative center. But it's really about Ali as a religious conscientious objector. And then I'm trying to weave in the story of Ethel Waters, who opened up for Billy Graham, and Eldridge Cleaver, and Mary Lou Williams, the jazz pianist, and the way religion worked for them as a lived and function in their lives and in their public performance. So that's where I'm trying to go now. And if I can escape students and administrative responsibility, I'll get it done.
Yes, I wanted to say that, piggyback on to both recipients, that much archival work that was done in the South, it was sent to places in the North so it wouldn't be destroyed down here. That's what it's called.
Well, I wanted to say a bit about when I first started on the Maze Project. It wasn't really, I don't consider Washington, D.C. the North. I mean, now that's me. I just say it's below the Mason-Dixon line as far as I'm concerned. But Dr. Maze's papers were sent to Howard at the time. And I remember calling Morehouse saying, I'm working on Dr. Maze, and I got really sharp answer. Well, Dr. Maze's papers not here. He sent them to Howard. Okay, in the HBCU world, that's a rivalry. I tell my friends they play the Bougie Bowl. That's what I call that football game. Who's the best dressed? But the papers were sent to Howard because at that time, Moreland Spin Garden is still one of the outstanding collections in the United States. So those resources are all around. And we need to, I would say, for all of us who do this kind of work, we need to support those archives because they desperately need resources, funding. That's the places that keep our history. So I hope you all will fund those. Send a check, 25, 30. Y'all can send Obama $5. Y'all can send these archives the same thing.
I have questions for both of you, but in the interest of time, I'll just pick one. But Francoise, I've got a question for you. It comes from the epilogue of your book, and one of the things that just really kind of, I guess it made me sad about the epilogue was reading about Vera Mae Piggy's daughter. And you talked to her in 2005, and she had a comment something along the lines of that, did I give up my childhood for this, thinking about the state of affairs, state of race relations at that time. And I just wondered if you had any follow-up on that or any comments about that. Has her feeling about that changed? Has her disillusionment lessened somewhat, or does she still feel that way?
she still feels that way, and that's actually my next project. The project I'm going to work on now was actually sparked by my conversations with her and with Rebecca Henry, Erin Henry's daughter, who also felt very disillusioned with her life because of her father's activities. So the next project is going to talk about the children of activists and the young people and sort of the personal costs of activism on young people and children. So it's still in civil rights history, but making the civil rights history children's history. So making that transition. Thank you.
Can we give one more round of applause to our recipients? One of the things that we like to do at these events is provide an opportunity for people who attend to speak to the authors, and we will provide that opportunity at a room across the hall after we adjourn. We also like to give them the opportunity to purchase books and autograph them. Unfortunately, we have not been able to secure copies this time. So what I'm told is that the authors will be available to autograph your program when you go across the hall. But what I want to mention to you is this. As Dr. Hamlin said, we live in a time of commemorations. You know, we commemorate what happened 50 years ago. It was 50 years ago that there was a March on Washington at which Benjamin Mays gave fiction. But in the commemoration, one of the things that you may have heard was our president speak in terms of the arc of the moral universe. And he said it doesn't bend towards justice on its own. It bends because there are people who make it bend. People like those who are the subject of these books. And so the thought I'd like to leave with you is this. Where are the Benjamin Mayses of today and tomorrow? Where are the Erin Henrys and the Vera Mae Piggies? And we would like to think that those people are out there. They're out there right now being inspired by what's in the pages of these books. We thank you for coming.